us who started the research topics, the infrastructure of Portsmouth, and then we split off into a group of 5 and 4 who've done our individual things. So I think the plan was to do half an hour of this group stuff, and then some of your feedback, and then we'll split off into our separate groups.
Fantastic.
And you're all MH1?
That's right.
Yeah.
Are you recording it?
Yeah.
On purpose?
Yeah, for mine, if you wanted to see it.
Can't actually see faces.
No, it's more about the
Alright.
audio.
Is it actually going?
Yeah, it's going.
Do you mind me? I'm sorry, guys. After that comment about drinking coffee, and I'm going to be using my notes.
Zoom in over faces.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Do you have a name?
Me?
Yeah.
Do you have a name?
Just group 1 and 2.
Supergroup 1 and 2.
Martin's.
Oh, these are Martin's supergroups. Okay. The others were Walter Foreigners.
So as I said before, this is just starting the infrastructural research. Each of us has gone into separate topics, and it's all about the current infrastructure.
Okay, I just want to give you a brief history, just to quickly touch on the history of Portsmouth, because we all know about it anyway. So I just want to kind of briefly touch it. Along Eastern, historically, there's a lot of marshland originally, and that sort of has been built on gradually over time, but it's sort of a lot of green space, etc., over that area. The southwest has always sort of been built up the town centre, even the Tudor times, and built up over fortifications. And generally, that's been the main city centre of Portsmouth, and it hasn't really changed over time. It's always been the main built-up area. And the routes off Portsmouth have always been to the north, and it's always been several roads built in different locations, and some been fortified, some been taken away. But that's generally sort of been the pattern of Portsmouth, and I just wanted to make that slightly aware as we go on to it, just so you know.
Nice
This is looking at the living environment around Portsmouth, with the darkest blue area, which is considered the most deprived areas. A good thing to take note is that this index is done only considering the indoors living environment, which is quality of housing, and the external environment, which is basically just the road and traffic conditions. Out of the 125 LSOA areas in Portsmouth, which are basically just census-based population areas between 1,000 and 3,000 residents, 57 areas in Portsmouth are actually considered under 10% most deprived areas in England. So just a brief image looking at Portsmouth, if and when it does flood, a lot of the middle area section of Portsmouth is fairly blue. So there's a living environment quality there that is lacking. This is basically just a Nolly diagram showing areas that would be affected by the flood in the 2 meter level rise, which is the worst case scenario. Going on to commuting patterns. In 2011, there's about 59,000 resident workers in Portsmouth, and out of this 59,000, over 28,000 commute out of Portsmouth to top places like Havant, Fareham, Winchester, Chichester, and East Hampshire. And in this graph, you can see in comparison to 2001 and 2011, there is a slight increment in the percentage of workers going out of Portsmouth to find work. In looking at the in-commuting patterns, over 41,000 workers come into Portsmouth, and most of them also come from Havant with over 10,000. Fareham, this is a mistake, it's Gosport, about 6,000 people from Gosport comes into Portsmouth for work. That leads to then looking at the main methods of travel. As you can see from the graph here, the most used method is by car, which would put a lot of strain on the motorways, followed by walking, bus, cycling, and then the rail. This is a diagram showing workplace zone and the densities of this area. I think it's important to look at it in relation to transport routes, as where employment and population are at will play a factor in how people travel around. Looking at rail routes that's going through does go through denser areas of Portsmouth, and the bus services route also serves most of the areas in Portsmouth, and yet out of 15, there's about 15,000 people in Portsmouth who prefers to walk and cycle rather than take public transportation.
Okay, so I looked at tourism and accommodation in Portsmouth. And tourism economy in Portsmouth is probably 65% of the general. I'm taking a figure from 2008, and in 2008, 3.8 million overnight visitors came to Portsmouth. And that's generating in Hampshire, not Portsmouth, 1.55 billion. But generally, people tend to come for a day or just one night in Portsmouth. And I found that quite an interesting fact. And I tried to look into the reasons to why they would only come for one night. And a lot of the time they use Portsmouth as a link by the ferry, so they come say one night, go maybe say for a day looking at attractions. There's also a lack of the advertising and recreational and tourist activities in Portsmouth, which is something that has been identified since then and is on the uptrend. And then also the standard of accommodation in Portsmouth is quite low, so when people come they stay the night and they don't really want to stay for much longer. In Portsmouth there's about 1,500 units available per day, available for everyone. Each unit can be anything from a single bed to a double bed. There are 2 5-star hotels, but they're not within Portsmouth, so I didn't really concentrate on that. I looked at the sort of area spread of where each hotels are, and generally there's only about the majority of hotels in Portsmouth are 2-star budget or unrated. So unrated is sort of bed and breakfast, like 1 2 stay night kind of things. And most of the accommodation is sort of in that area, 3-star being a bit lower as well. And the cost range is 130 to 25, but most commonly it's sort of mid-range to low, so 70 to 50 and to 30. So it's, again, that's just emphasising the low accommodation of why people only stay for one night or only come for the day. So assuming that each unit can only seat 2 people, say it's a double room, a double bed, a twin, Portsmouth limit is about 1 million people per night per year. And more people that come in to stay overnight, and the last night is about 2 million. So obviously we haven't got enough to accommodate people that come when they come, say, assuming they come every day of the year. In 2009, it attracted 7.2 day visitors, and it is the most visited destination in all of Hampshire. So it's quite an important part of Hampshire because most people want to come, what do they see? And when they come, they tend to come for the history in Portsmouth and culture. The historic dockyard is the second highest attendance in all of Hampshire, so it's attracted 500,000 people a year. And the Spinnaker Tower is, well, it's classed as historic, but it's not. If you look at the figures, and it's the second highest historic location in Hampshire, sorry. But again, attracting 389,000 a year. And like, since then, Portsmouth has put a lot of investment into attractions, culture, and hotels. But it's still on the uptrend, they haven't quite finished it, so they're trying to draw people in. The examples of what they've done is they've got the new Mary Rose Museum, which was opened in 2013. They've brought in the Park and Ride 2013, which has helped people come into the city for that day visit, not having to go through all the congestion down to Portsmouth. And also the new boatyard, which is the home for the Ben Isle racing team, which is again going to bring more people in. And then they're hoping that the new ships coming in 2017 will be a massive attraction of people to London as well.
Yeah, so I started looking at transport for the city. We've got the major routes into the city being the M275, which is a really short motorway, it's only 2 miles long, but that's the major route into the city. And it's sort of bottlenecked, so it doesn't really work at the moment. Then you've got the M27, which is the main road to Southampton, joining onto the M275 just here in Portsmouth. A27 is a Southern Trunk Road, which runs all the way from Salisbury to Eastbourne. It's one of the main roads in the UK. And then you've got the A3, which links Portsmouth to the M25 in London. And then you've got things like the Eastern Road and the A2047, which joins in North End to Portsmouth. The rail in the city, we've got 4 main train stations in the city. We had a bigger rail system at one point, things like the Billy Line in Hayling Island, taken away because of the cost to repair the bridge. You've got the Gosport Line, which was taken away because of low passenger numbers, closed in 1953. You've got the East South Sea Railway, which was taken away for the same reason, low passenger numbers. That was actually dismantled for the steel for World War I effort. I looked at a proposed scheme, which was the LRT, which involved a tram system from Commercial Road up to Fareham train station and then on to Southampton. It didn't go forward because of the cost, and it links to major airports and cities across the country, furthest really being Cardiff. Next one. I looked at the sea travel, so you've got several ferry routes connecting to the Isle of Wight and Gosport. These routes have been going, well, the Gosport ferry has been going since the 1600s, just in different formats. At the moment, it's just a standard sort of ferry fleet. And then you've got the White Link ferries, which are car and passenger ferries, which are major transport and commuter route for the Isle of Wight. The hovercraft is actually the fastest way across there, and then you've got the international ferries which travel to France and Spain. There was also a canal system in place at one point which was to enable ships to travel up to London without entering the English Channel because of the Napoleonic threat. That was taken away because it was financially unsuccessful.
It was actually barges, not ships.
Yeah, sorry.
Like ships. It took munitions. The whole point was you could get munitions from the Thames to Portsmouth without going around the sea.
Yeah.
Which made it presumably.
Which was again for yeah, it was defensive.
Yeah.
Strategic.
How do you know that? That's interesting.
Then I just looked at the bus services throughout the city. So Portsmouth's got 23 bus routes around it. It's got 8 national bus routes, just showing how connected the city is. Connects to things like the city centre, the hospitals, and Godmore Quays. And they see it as an important transport infrastructure for the city, investing in the Tipner Parkham Road, and they're also improving the Hyde interchange at the moment. And then I looked at the cycle routes. These are the cycle routes that the council designate as safe. So there are quite a lot of cycle routes within the city. Not all of them are specified as actual cycle lanes.
So what does that mean?
I mean, like, they're not marked on roads and stuff like that. These are the routes that the council, so this includes all of them. So these are the routes the council suggests for bike
So
riding.
it's very different from the previous group.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is these are what are potential cycle routes.
Yeah,
that can
so-
be used for cycle.
Yeah.
If you look on like the Portsmouth website and stuff, there's 8 dedicated cycle routes all the way around. They're all inclusive now. There's 8 separate.
Do you guys all? Any of you guys cycle around?
Not you.
Do none of you cycle?
I just walk everywhere. It's
You
small.
walk?
Yeah.
No, you
You only get
cycle.
by a
So you
car.
don't go up to North Portsmouth at all? Because look at the big schism between North and South Portsmouth. You've only got 1, 2, 3, 4 routes through from the south to the north. Quite extraordinary. Even on that one which Stokes the Native safe, it looks like a ghetto.
And then I looked at the Millennium Walkway as well, which is a route around, a tourist route around Old Portsmouth, leading onto the Heart, that shows most of the city's main historical buildings. And the council are actually trying to encourage people to use walking and cycling as a mode of transport for a healthy lifestyle and to get traffic off the roads. Next one. Looked at the previous tram system within the city. It was open until 1936. Started in 1840. It was the first public transport in the city. And it was initially horse-drawn carriages. The first rail tram was actually built in 1865, which linked Portsmouth Southsea Station down to Clarence Pier, which is, there, which is the original pontoon for the Isle of Wight ferry. And that was a rail horse-drawn rail tram, it's just there. That was so that was the Portsmouth Tram Corporation, and Portsmouth Corporation, which is a separate company, bought it by Act of Parliament in 1898 so that they could improve the system that was there. So from 1901 to 1910 they electrified with overhead cables and had 28 miles of tram route, 84 trams, and there was around 50,000 people per day using it. It was replaced by the bus services. Next one. So, and then going on to air transport within the city. Portsmouth had a major airport for the region. It was classed as a regional airport, and it was open from 1932 to 73. It was closed because there was no space to expand it, and because of that, the bigger planes that were coming in, 2 of them actually overran the runway. One ended up in Hillsey Creek and one ended up on the Eastern Road. Luckily no one died, but that was the reason why they stopped main flights to it. The main route was to Paris, and there was an Isle of Wight air ferry. And today it's actually the company that owned the airport then still work there as an industrial company, so they make parts and sell parts for planes and stuff like that. And at the moment it's just housing, retail and industrial unit. And then I just looked at some of the surrounding airports like Southampton Airport, Heathrow Airport and Gatwick Airport are within a 70-mile radius. So there's connections to the major airports. And then HMS Daedalus and RAF Thorney Island were Air Force and Naval bases. And then just looked at the Isle of Wight Airport, which was the passenger airport which the air ferry flew to.
Okay, so I've been looking at the agriculture. Started off in the UK, so looking at how the widest sort of scale responded to Portsmouth, and just picking out a few facts here. 3/4 of the UK is farmland, but only 1.6% of the population are actually in the industry. So there's a huge amount of potential there, but there's no sort of government incentive for young people to go into it. It's an ageing employment. And a lot of the farmland at the moment is sort of changing into sort of biofuels and things. They're going away from croplands and sort of livestock and things because there's just no incentive in it anymore. I mean, we had the problems with the milk farmers recently. So all of these things, they're sort of amounting to the professions kind of dwindling and sort of failing. I say there's not really any sort of incentive for the young people to go into the industry. There is something called the Common Agricultural Policy, which is an EU policy that helps European countries with farmland. So there's incentive from the EU, but there's nothing coming from the UK government themselves. So there's a lot of potential there, but nothing being pushed for it. Looking at the imports into Portsmouth, a lot of it comes from the Caribbean, Central and South America. The biggest importation at the moment is fruit. So over 70% of the UK's consumption of bananas comes through Portsmouth International Port, which I love that. I love that fact. In 2010, there were 610,000 tonnes of fruit coming into Portsmouth. So you can see, you sort of picture the sort of scale that's coming in through Portsmouth. Although it's not one of the biggest ports in the UK, I think it was below number 10 or something that we looked at earlier. But for fruit and food, it's one of the biggest, especially on the south coast. And you can imagine all of these countries worldwide, they import all of they export into Portsmouth all of this food. The Portsmouth Commercial Port, that's the main port, and it's split up into 2 separate parts. The Continental Ferry Port, which is mostly foot passengers or freight, like standard freight, and then you've got the MMD, which is the sort of fruit importation factory, and they use all of the rail services and the exports throughout the whole of the UK. Exports from Portsmouth is very, very limited. So we've got land port, which is the place I've just mentioned. It's all the fruit comes in and goes out through that. You've got all of the marinas, but they're sort of very social places. They're not they're not international, they're not commercial places. These are very independent places. Hilsea is known for its sort of fish, meat, all the wholesalers are up there, all of the companies are based up in Hilsea. So it's kind of a nice connection from not just dealing with Portsmouth, but it deals with the rest of the UK and in sports throughout the world as well. Moving on to allotments, I know we've already touched on it before. There's 1,700 plots in Portsmouth, a few off the island itself, and I don't know whether it was said earlier, but the waiting list at the moment is between 18 months and 3.5 years for an allotment. And some of these facts that I picked out, they're very well, not contradictory, but you kind of can't understand it, because just here the council spends £112,000 on keeping the allotments running, but they only gain half of that back. So people are waiting for these allotments to use, but the people using it at the moment, they're not keeping them up, they're not using them, there's not the sort of production that is hoped for. And you know, there's a range of uses for these things: vegetables, fruit, livestock, and you know, it's one of those aspects that can be rejuvenated to help in Portsmouth's sort of agriculture. In terms of history, most of it was farmland. We all know about the historical centre, where all of the sort of main infrastructure was, all the fortifications were around that harbour. The rest of it was all farmland up until about the 1840s. And there was one farm that sort of stayed behind, and that was Milton. So Milton Village, they've still got a barn in the middle of their green. So it's still existing today. It still poses some sort of visual impact. But, you know, it's one of those things that is in the history of Portsmouth, and you know, it's an opportunity to sort of bring it back. So Portsmouth's future plan, what they want to do in the future, it's very much it protects the green spaces that are currently there, enhance them, and then link them all together. So they don't want to create more green spaces, they want to just enhance the ones that are already there. And this doesn't necessarily reflect agriculture, this is just what they want to do for the green spaces. At the moment, I've taken some pictures around Portsmouth. You can see some of the common, Victoria Park, but there's also a lot of wasted space down the seafront. You've got a lot of abandoned places. This part here is just by the main roads down at the common, and I can't for the life of me figure out what it's for.
Whereabouts is that? Pointed about on the map.
I can't remember where it was. It was just about down here.
Oh, right, okay.
King's Hotel.
That's right.
Yeah. So this is right next to the King's Hotel, and then this is just a little bit on from
Yeah,
that.
that's a big site now.
But it's, you know, looking at guerrilla gardening and things, it's a space that someone can utilise quite effectively. At the moment in Portsmouth, there's a lot of community initiatives that aren't to do with the council. The council don't really give any sort of incentive for these things. So Highbury College, just over the road from us, they've got a lot of stuff that they do with the community. But the main thing is Southsea Greenhouse. So over by Canoe Lake, there's a green allotment area, which is this long, thin strip of land, and effectively it was disused before. Now they've sort of changed it into this community allotment, where they've also got a cafe and things. So from my research, it's all about changing people's minds, as opposed to trying to provide for as many people. It's about changing people's minds about how food is grown. So how food comes into the house, because at the moment you just go and buy it, there's no sort of connection between what's grown. Two case studies quite quickly. Cuba, they were sort of pushed into being as self-sustainable as possible because of the fall of the USSR. All of these embargoes, all the sanctions and things, because they're so close to America, there was no imports coming in. They had no hope other than to use the land that they'd got to revitalise and sort of try and keep everything going. So they've got a huge amount of urban farming going on, producing loads of food, and their imports are slowly coming back, but most of their production is on an agricultural scale. There's currently 200,000 Cubans working in the agricultural sector. But the important thing about this and and one of the other precedents is that it's publicly owned and managed, but there's lots of subsidies from the government. You know, that they're helping as best as they can, and I suppose they were forced into it. But you know, there's that thought there that there's the government that are giving the incentives, they're the ones that are helping. So Detroit is my next one, and as we all know, after the motor industry sort of started reducing, Detroit started reducing as well. And there's a huge amount of void in Detroit at the moment, so lots of vacant, abandoned lots and things. So the community, and there's lots of master plans going on at the moment trying to revitalise these spaces, and it was all about how can you sustain a city and how can you utilise those abandoned spaces. So there's one Capuchin Soup Kitchen and Earthworks Urban Farm, and the interesting thing about this, as I said before, it's about making a significant impact into people's capacity to provide for themselves. That's a quote from the manager of the soup kitchen. It's not about providing for as many people as possible, it's about trying to change people's minds, because in turn that will change the way people eat. Some master plans here as well that sort of show the ideas behind changing these abandoned lots into very interesting landscapes that help with the growth of the community.
So I looked at heat and power. Started off by looking at some statistics on Portsmouth carbon emissions. They currently stand at 1.2 million tonnes a year, broken down into 3 basic sections of industrial, commercial, domestic and transport. And then I looked to the future and just looked at some predictions that they've got. And there's sort of quite a few problems that it presents with the climate change, but it also presents opportunities for us to create renewable energy sources. So, also just touching on this, there's currently 18,000 homes that are not very energy efficient in Portsmouth as well, just because of the way that they were built, their heating, their insulation. And then I looked at 5 sites in Portsmouth that I focused on, just a case study. The energy recovery facility, the CHP and Charles Dickens Estate, the International Port, the old power station and the historic dockyard. Okay, so this is the historic dockyard, and they still use steam for heating at the moment. They've got 5 boiler houses, and I think it's the only place in Portsmouth that uses steam for heating still. Now I looked at how this can be done on a larger scale. In Manhattan they still use it quite widely, so they use it for 100,000 homes and businesses. But it worked out quite cost effective in Manhattan because they've got high-rise buildings, so maybe there might be a possibility for Portsmouth in the distant future when it gets more densely populated with high-rise buildings, for example. And then this is the Charles Dickens Estate. So the government have put in a CHP, which combines heat and power. So it's basically more energy efficient than your regular boiler system. And they've just combined the two, basically. And they expect to save 424 tonnes of carbon per year, which if you think about it isn't very significant really, because of the original sum I gave, which is 1.2 million a year. This is the old power station, which I think someone showed earlier. Just basically looking at the scale of it and how much it provided to the national grid. It became surplus to requirements, so but obviously now it's sort of required again. So yeah,
I've seen that photo. It does dwarf the rest of the town. Look at the rest of the.
So that's basically Burnley Road there, and the lipstick would be down here somewhere.
But hang on. Is that the park beyond that's covered in buildings?
No, that's
The university bit?
that's the sports field.
Yeah, but the sports fields in the immediate foreground, and then beyond
So that bit, are you talking about that bit?
No, just above it. You keep going.
Oh, up here.
No, so right, that bit there, straight ahead. This bit here.
You see that line there? That's a building. And actually, the park goes back to there now, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that's Burnley Road there.
Yeah. You know, is that?
So they chose that location basically for the seawater, which they use for condensing purposes, and for the transportation of coal to and from the facility.
Which was the railway, of course, it was in.
I think it was mainly ships. To be
Oh, was
honest.
it ships?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so here's some representations that people have done for how these new boats are going to look in the harbour. And basically, yeah, I think it's been mentioned as well that if they come to the city and plug in, then Portsmouth will just basically go dark. So there's talks at the moment of a new power station of some sort. It's early stages, and they're not sure which is going to be biomass, gas or fuel or coal, sorry. But any excess energy from that will be fed into the national grid again. So it's basically taking a step back to what was there before, hopefully not lots of horrific. This is Portsmouth International Port, which uses seawater to heat and cool the building, and to flush the toilets as well, just grey water. And basically this just shows the process of how it's taken through heat transfer, and then run through all the pipes in the building. Yeah.
Where's your room, by the way? Where's your room?
The loan, yeah. And then this is Dundalk in the Netherlands, which basically does the same thing but on a residential for a residential place and on a larger scale. So they've got a population of 5,395, and all of them are basically using the seawater to heat their homes, but it comes with a few sort of difficulties where in summer obviously the seawater's warmer, and then in winter it's obviously cooler, so they have to do a little bit of additional heating in the winter, which obviously uses energy, but they take their energy from wind turbines, so they can save on that as well. And then obviously when it gets to their home they have to heat it up slightly further as well, so that takes excess energy as well. And then just looking at the South East Energy Recovery Facility.
The other problem is you're cooling the sea, of course.
And they basically, yeah, so here they take the heat from the waste and convert it to steam, which then converts it to energy, which is then pumped to just over 20,000 local homes, and then whatever they've got extra is put onto the national grid as well. Yeah, that's quite an interesting fact there as well. So a ton of solid waste equates to a third of a ton of coal.
That's why it's rather than yeah,
But we just tip it. You can get
So I looked at communications and overlap to power with George as well. I looked at Portsmouth as a whole in our current power usage and what we're actually allowed as a city to, what we're capable of bringing in as our capacity. And they measure our capacity in MVAs, which I don't really understand. But it equates roughly a 1-to-1 ratio to megawatts. And basically we're allowed 90 MVA, so 90 megawatts at any given second of time. And at the moment our peak capacity probably in the evening times, we hit 86. So we have a leeway of 4 megawatts for the entire city at the moment. So then looking at the boats coming in, the new ones at 10 each, they're probably staged, they don't come together. But if they ever did come at the same time, it's 20 extra megawatts we've got to kind of find from somewhere. So we're already 16 below over our capacity.
What are these MVAs?
They're megavolt ampage.
Okay. Which is the same as
It's
what?
a straight, yeah.
Volt times an amp to what? So
Yeah. The interesting thing though is about the boats, despite being that close to our capacity, it's not actually a big worry for the city. So when you look at the population, it's increased between 2008 and 2013, it increased by 3.7%, yet our demand went down by 2% on our electricity. So despite the increase in population, we're still using less. And at the moment, our population increase per year is dropping down from 0.7 to 0.6% a year. So as our population then changes and gets lower as it increases, our energy will drop by even more as it is at the moment. Okay, so I started
That would
looking
be
at
useful to have on that slide.
yeah. I started looking at current infrastructure that isn't used or utilised at the moment that was in the past for either communication or power usage. And I got a little bit obsessed with Portsmouth Hill and going underneath it. And in the 1930s, they built the naval fuel bunkers underneath, or just left of Fort Suffolk. They're currently 20 metres below the top surface, and it's 120 metre fall from the bunkers to the dockyards. They have a capacity of 320,000 metres cubed of liquid storage, that is, and there's 2 miles of tunnel network connecting all the tanks together. Massive facility underground.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, part of that is these tunnels, yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that's big.
Where do they go from to? Did you find that out?
Yeah, I went and visited. The photos before were my ones.
Are they yours?
Yeah, they're mine for visiting. The M27 runs just through here. There's not a map with it drawn on because it's supposed to be hidden. There's 2 entrances to it, but it's 500 metres from top to bottom in length and 300 across. Each tank's 220 metres wide, or 244 metres wide, by 10.5 metres height and width. And they can all have 19,500 tonnes of fuel. And basically, they used it during D-Day to take the fuel down to the naval ships in case we ever got kind of sectioned off by the Germans and couldn't get any fuel into the country. They used this as a backup so we could still perform all the operations during the war. So all the pumping network still built into the ground and is still actually usable. They've just capped it off at the moment. And there's 2 links that run down to either Portsmouth naval dockyards or to the pumping fuel station over in
This is
Gosport.
huge though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's massive.
Absolutely massive.
You need to overlay that with a map.
Yeah.
Portsmouth, so you get the scale of it.
Well, this is Fort Suffolk here.
Yeah.
And then that bundle there is this bundle there. So it's actually bigger than the fort
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
It'd be good to redraw that as the previous steps there.
Okay, so then I do get a bit stuck on the hill.
Okay.
Yeah. And I looked at the other tunnels underneath and how they were used for communications purposes during the wars as well. Underneath Fort Suffolk itself is a 1.1 mile tunnel network, which became the D-Day communications host, if you like. All the operations were run from there, they were sent from there, and it was buried, I think 13 metres below the surface, so that there's a 22-foot concrete roof to it, so no bombs could actually attack it. So it's a pretty secure communication outpost for all our war efforts. And the D-Day landings were run from here, and 700 staff worked from here to work with the decryptors before the landings took place. So it was pretty much the main host of all the naval communications in Portsmouth. And joined to that was the first secure radio station in the south, which was also built into the hill. And they dug it in and built up, I think, 100 metres up to the surface. It's 40 metres off the ground now because of the chalk pits being excavated. It was ground level, 100 metres to the top, and they ran it to the aerials at the top so that bombs couldn't hit them. It was the first fully secure radio outpost in the south of England, and were then used during the wars, and then got moved on to the Cold War when NATO took over as well. You can go and visit this one still if you'd like, if you're good at climbing.
so those are the photos. If we go back to the photos, these are where the entrances are.
Yeah, that's me.
Are they at an angle going up? Are they flat?
This one's vertical. Vertical, yeah. There's little footholds you've got to scramble up the chalk press to get to the top.
And that gets you into A, or
That one's A, and that one's N. No one's really sure what N was.
right.
It's just another little alcove bit. Yeah, and then finally the other tunnels are in the hills. There's the completing the network that's up there. It's like infrastructure that isn't being used at all when it's blocked up. It's another works out roughly just over 2,500 metres of other tunnels, which became the main air raid shelters during the wars. Hosted 7,500 people lived in the hills during the bomb raids, and we normally go between 4 to 5 times a night back and forward to these tunnels. And they basically work like little cities in the hill. They all had their own hospitals, their own kitchens, everything was in there. And each one had their own communication outpost in each corner, which then linked with the other communications posts for the headquarters under Suffolk. So there's one big communicating network that literally pretty much ran the Navy during the wars. And this is their locations on the hill. So they're quite spread out, which is to avoid the threats of the Navy attacks. So the bunkers are located over here, and then everything sort of goes east from there. Okay, so looking at how I could reuse them and make up the deficit of the power in the city, I looked at El Hierro, which is an island in the Canary Islands, and their main objective is to become 100% cut off from mainland Spain. At the moment, they have to ship all the oil over to an oil power station and create all their power that way. A couple of years ago, they built their first sustainable power station, but they didn't want to do it in a way where they had to use current power to make their hydropower work. So they did the first combined wind hydro station, and they used the power of the wind turbines to pump the water up during the day and split the power 50-50, and pump the water up, and then use the other power to cope with low demand, and then the high demand they release everything and use the turbine at the same time to cover all the electricity power. They haven't finished the bottom reservoir yet, but at the moment it does 70% of their whole island's power usage, and when it's finished, they feel it's going to hit the 100% mark and they'll be completely self-sufficient from the island. They currently get 38, or will be 38 when they finish it off. And this is the savings they made by doing it. Which one? El Hierro.
And you need just over twice that, don't you?
It's just
Yes,
spelled
just over
out the
twice.
top. El Hierro.
Yeah. Where is it?
It's in the Canary Islands. Yeah, it's just southwest of Tenerife. So this is the savings they actually got from doing it. So they're saving just over 18,500 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year, which is the same as 20,000 football pitches of trees having to be planted to save that. The sulphur and nitrogen is also the equivalent of 600 kilometres of a bus driving. And then oil ways are saving 40,000 barrels of oil that they used to have to ship from the mainland Spain over to the island itself to actually run their power, which is 1.8 million euros that they're saving a year, which they now put back into the island on their sustainable strategies. Yeah. Okay, so the modern communications. We currently have our own mobile signal tower up on Portsmouth Hill, but our main sort of national services all come from the Isle of Wight at Rowridge and Chillerton. There used to be the BBC ran Rowridge and ITV ran Chillerton, and there was a bit of a fight over there because they're quite close. And if you want to change to the next one, Rowridge, which currently is our digital service, and it was the digital service that put Chillerton pretty much out of business completely. The problem was that the mast sizes, and Rowridge now have two, and they built quite sturdy, the big triangulated truss masts, whereas Chillerton only had a really tall thin mast and couldn't host the digital services for all of our network that it is now. So Rowridge now hosts our digital, all BBC DAB and BBC standard radios, and are eventually changing all this over to their new mast, which is I think the fourth tallest mast going up in the country now, which also makes it the sixth tallest structure in the country. Next one. This is Chillerton, all on its own now, which only runs the ITA, which is now ITV, used to run their TV, and going to do VHF channels until UHF came in. And so all they get to do now is just DAB that's non-BBC channels, and once that goes over to Rowridge as well, this one will probably be decommissioned completely. And this is the current signal area that Rowridge does on itself. It covers pretty much all the south central of the country. The next closest tower is up in the Surrey Hills. Next one. So looking at our historic communications, these are the shutter towers, and were the first communication that Portsmouth had to get outside the city. There are a big beam of them that went between us and London, and it was made up of 6 panels, and they used to twist the panels into different patterns, and different patterns meant different letters. And to get one letter down from London to us took 20 minutes. So if you wanted to send a sentence, you're looking at about a week to send a sentence.
What, one letter?
One letter took 20 minutes. They were manned by 2 people in each one, had a stack each. Yeah.
Do you know the Romans managed to get letters from Spain to Rome in a day?
Yeah.
They had their penny trails, basically.
But it's the French system, isn't it?
This is the French system that we took over.
Good.
After the Napoleonic Wars, they realised it was pretty poor, couldn't do it. So they changed it to Septimore towers, which were developed by the French. And they're a little bit faster. You can send probably a whole message in 20 minutes. But they use roughly the same route and split it off so we could also get to Plymouth as well, to reach the other naval base that was down there. That eventually finished in 1847 when the electric telegraphs took over and pretty much ended all these fun little buildings that we had. And now the same sites that we used, the original two ones, are now where our new mobile towers stand, which definitely don't look quite as nice. So, yeah.
So I looked at clean water first. This is a map showing the locations serviced by Portsmouth Water. So you can see it branches out much further than just Portsmouth. It's quite huge. They've got 21 sources, 18 treatment works. The sources vary from springs, rivers and boreholes, but the Itchy River is the primary source. So it's a diagram of the process that the water has to go through to get to our taps. So they extract it from the source, they then screen it, they add chemicals to clump together the muck, they then put it through sedimentation, let it float in water, they filter it, add chlorine, and then they take it to a surface reservoir, store it, and then it's ready to go, pumped to your house, wherever you want it. Obviously bacterial contamination is like a huge problem potentially. It's really restricted now, so it's not really any problems with it. All the supplies are checked frequently by government agencies. So this is just a little bit about the Itchy River. It is a triple SI, and it's a chalk stream. It's clean enough for fish, but not enough for us to drink. It has a lot of problems with the purity of the water. It gets contaminated quite a lot from surface runoff and industrial pollution. So they've actually built a raw water reservoir, which they store the water, and it's got such a high capacity that if necessary they can stop taking in more water if it becomes too polluted, and then they'll just pick back up again once the levels got safer. There's a few agencies that sort of try and look after the water in Portsmouth and surrounding areas, and obviously the coastal areas are quite a concern because all this water that they potentially put back in later contains algae, which essentially suffocates the nature of the ground under the sea, and that then has an impact on the birds and things like that. So this is looking at wastewater. Again, it's not just Portsmouth that is serviced by Temple Water, but it is a smaller service. So there's a population of 410,000 people that are served. It's quite inefficient, I would say. As you've seen from other people today, it's not great, yeah. And it's really quite shocking that actually until 2000 they used to just put everything straight out to the sea, they didn't treat it.
It's when you used to go swimming as a kid, isn't it?
Yeah, I used to go jet skiing on Painting Island.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all along the south coast, and then that's all of Portsmouth. It was about a mile off sea. We used to pride ourselves. You would go to France and you smelt the drains as a child, and very rude about the French.
Yeah.
But in this country, we just chucked it.
You just threw it to the French.
We took it a mile. Well, we took it a mile off shore. We thought that was good.
It's really horrendous to think that was only 15 years ago. It's actually, Bud's Farm is actually really advanced. It's one of two in the country that does this garden flow process, and that is because of this risk of algae in our harbours.
But you know the harbour is still suffering, obviously.
Yeah.
So it still has got a very high nutrient content, which is not healthy. Or it's not regarded as particularly healthy. That's what one other person was saying.
So this is another little diagram of how they deal with the waste. It's kind of the same in reverse, really. Except the solids are used for...
Have you been to a plant? It's very interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really good stuff. I mean, you know, because it just brings it all home, so to speak.
Yeah.
They do tours?
They do tours.
They do tours,
They
yeah.
offer you a glass at the end.
Yeah.
Did you take it?
No, it's very interesting because, of course, you know, it's not just a simple diagram like that. There's all lots of complexities to it, and the technology that's been developed is comparatively new, as we know, and yet it's fundamental to all our health.
Yeah. So this step C is probably worth noting that the bacteria removal is an optional step from these solids, which again is a regional thing because of the algae. The stormwater, the combined system does cause problems. It causes floodings very occasionally. The systems get overwhelmed, and Portsmouth is actually planning to try and work away from the combined system and build new pumping stations and things. And this in Chichester, I think that's all been covered today. In Chichester, they've got this new system that they built, I think it was 2009, and they now have a more efficient way of dealing with their stormwater. So rather than combining it with the wastewater, they release it directly, and they disinfect it with ultraviolet along the way. So it's not sort of
Probably
sitting
after
in
the
tanks.
massive floods in Chichester, probably a little bit before that, probably the result of that, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's quite a
Massive flooding.
quite a colossal amount that they can
Chichester
treat.
for about a year had pumps all through the city, pumping water through. Unbelievable. It was quite elaborate flooding, very badly. So it was just short water stream. And you feel the whole of what they were doing.
It can now get rid of 300 litres per second, so 31,000 pints of milk. So
A second
it's quite.
No,
That's per minute. Sorry.
per minute. Okay.
But that's huge, and I think that could be quite beneficial in Portsmouth as well.
Energy equation in that, though, isn't there?
exactly. I think
Yeah.
on the last two, the big attack on the energy balance. How much does this cost? Both of these treatments.
I mean, also the other thing that's interesting to me is someone once saying that raw sewage is actually quite hot. You know, so you've actually got a lot of dishwashing liquids and all those sorts of things going. So the temperature's quite high. The recovery of energy from that is never really addressed.
So carrying on sort of the water theme, and then branched off and I had a look at hydropower. There's a couple of different ways that you can do hydropower. That's sort of probably the most well known is an impoundment or a dam. But particularly I was interested in pumped storage. So I think someone mentioned it earlier, but this is the Electric Mountain Denora Power Station, which is in Snowdonia, and it was a slate quarry. Actually went there in May. It's absolutely huge. We went round it by bus inside the mountain.
Banner for stimulant.
No, this is Denora. It's even bigger.
Is
It's
it?
the same people.
Same range of slate. Probably.
Yeah. I think they're about 40 minutes apart. So the way they do it is the two reservoirs, they release it down from the top to generate electricity, and then at night they pump it back up.
So how does the energy equation work? Doesn't make sense because you're using as much energy pumped up as you're able to come down.
Yeah.
So where does the energy come from?
it's what they've made themselves, and then they use a bit back from the grid, I think. But they're a backup source.
So it's,
So-
so it's just the storage mechanism.
Yeah.
It's not actually making energy.
No, it's like a battery, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
a battery.
In fact, it must be losing energy.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you
yeah.
couldn't possibly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this would be whatever it would do.
Yeah. But I
Very
think
great.
the problem with hydropower as well is that most of the efficient places in the UK have already been used. So
I mean, it's different when we
You're
talk
not
about the
gonna get many.
example in areas where it's wind power, which is pumping it up,
yeah.
and then it's the
Yeah.
wind energy coming down, which is running the turbines.
So this is just a backup
This
source.
is
And this is primarily because they can't shut down the boilers in the power stations.
Yeah.
So at night when the capacity drops, they still have to continue to turn them, and they can't shut down the machines because you take more energy to keep them up than you do to keep them down. So you then use that energy to pump. You need to store that.
Yeah. They can fire it up and it takes 16 seconds, less than 16 seconds.
16 seconds
Before they've
start.
got it up and running. Yeah,
Blimey,
it's
that's-
crazy.
Very cool.
And,
How much energy can they store? How many kilowatts?
I can't remember. Off the top of my head.
Again, you get to type with these people who talk about.
Yeah.
Megawatts.
And then the last thing that I looked at was osmotic power, which is using fresh water and salt water, mixing the two. And there's two different ways of doing that. You can do it through red, which has a membrane between the two, which is positively and negatively charged, like alternating patterns. And as it passes through, the membranes are usually thin enough to allow the fresh water to pass through, but not the heavy salt water back through the other way. And then that creates like an electric charge across the membrane, so that creates direct electricity. Or the alternative is the Pro method, which is the only one that's actually been sort of used at the moment. And that just involves mixing the two, which create the chemical reaction creates heat. And they then use that heat to turn into electricity.
It seems like magic again. So why Norway? Is it because they've got lots of seawater and fresh water?
Yeah, and I think it's just this company particularly interested in it, and they're the first ones to get it up off the ground. But it's quite early days for that kind of technology because the membranes, there's not a huge amount of research into it at the moment, so they're still quite expensive. But there are lots of people that have started researching it. Like there's a lot going into it in MIT.
And the Swiss are quite advanced on their micro meshes as well.
Yeah.
So it might work in small scale.
And they
Yeah, because they do in India now they do these micro mesh filtration systems to pump water. They're so small. But
If you speed up a bit, then
yeah,
yeah.
that's
we've got so much stuff here.
Well, I just got one more.
okay. Good.
It means Siraj. We looked at flood defences. So we kind of started from the beginning, or at least how sea level rises are happening, and it's to do with global warming, as everyone probably knows by now. It's where we've got CO2 emissions, it's heating up, well, the temperature of the Earth's heating up, and therefore the ice is melting, and also the seawater expands as the temperature rises as well. Quite interesting there. This is only to 2008, but I personally thought the ice was a lot more a bigger factor, but you can see the warming of the oceans is quite close to it as well. So
what does that mean? Melting ice at 52% of what?
so that's how much the sea levels are rises, how much it equates
How
to.
much it
Yeah,
affects?
yeah. So half
Well,
of
what
it is to do with the
what
ice.
does affect
Yeah, so half of
affecting
it is the ice, and I thought it was a lot more, maybe 70-80% was the ice melting, but it's only 50%.
thermal expansion.
Yeah, that's correct. And I thought that was quite a powerful image of the rise.
Did you put that on the beach?
Yeah, I built it and painted it. So yeah, so by 2050, it's estimated the maximum sea level rise will be 0.5 metre. you know, so next one. Another quite powerful graphic. In 100 years or so, this could potentially be how high our sea level rises, potentially up to 2 meters. So father and son are drowned. That's not good. Oh, we'll go back a bit. Yeah, and that's due to the ice melting and the continued high emissions of heat trapping gases. So if we don't start changing that, then this is what's predicted. Yeah. This is it related to Portsmouth. This is an increase of 1 metre, it's up to 5 metres, and the 2100 was around this one. So you can see that the north of Portsmouth is really affected. Quite a bit of hailing as well. Further down the line, it obviously gets a lot worse, but I don't know dates on these. It's exponential, so the only dates I could find was for 100 years, it's 2 metres, but I imagine the next 100 years will be more than 2 metres because it's speeding up if we don't do something. So.
Right, this is looking into how many households would be affected by the flood, and going through all Portsmouth is usually quite a hotspot for getting flooded, and it's got quite a long history of when it's flooded, and the recent was 2008. So yeah, it does have a few defences, but it's not capable anymore of the rising sea level. We've got South Sea, which hasn't had a lot of tidal flood, but more into like the surface drainage and not being affected. The Eastern Pumping Station failing on 2000, and the image over there shows the kind of chaos it caused. You've got Hillsea and Eastern Portsmouth, which is kind of exposed to it's more kind of protected, but we all know there's a massive development being made, and it's because you've got I think the highest population in that side, if you combine it. Portsea and Tipner, it's quite well protected. Well, it doesn't have a lot of exposure, but it's quite protected by the Whale Island and all that, and it's quite a low, shallow floodplain, so it's okay. But if it does kind of rise out to sea level, then it will be affected. I couldn't really find any data for Central Portsmouth because it's a localized data and you can get it on the site. But I did look into the north end, the North Harbour to Farrington, which is on here, which is extremely low. It has a 1 in 200 year chance, which apparently it's quite a high percentage for that one. And then I kind of looked into geological soil composition because I thought that would be a really massive factor into why we're getting this flooding. Because Portsmouth, as you can see, it's all just clay and silt and sand, and you know that clay is not very good at absorbing water. Hence, you got a lot of ponding, and when you get water, it doesn't really kind of soak in. And you got chalk on the top end, but it's kind of raised up, so it's kind of fine. Right, looking into the 100 years, if we fast forward 100 years and looking at how much of the land would be underwater, there are, City of Portsmouth has estimated the following sectors would be, and how many sectors would be affected. So you've got IT, which, I don't know, it's a weird way of putting them in a sector, but IT has everything technological, and like IBM, even the university falls into IT, the BAE systems, and estimated 11,800 employees would be affected. You got marine, which would be all the shipping and all the boats and fleet support, and 7,000 employees and 250 firms would be affected by it. And then retail, tourism, and leisure. So, for example, gun wharf, hotels, and historic dockyards. Around 18,000 firms would be affected because it's mainly leisure. So, if you imagine, support would have a massive effect.
Yeah. So what Portsmouth doing about it? Well, currently, if you go off the island on Eastern Road, you'll see that they've started their sea wall, which which is 7.8 kilometres long, and it's costing around 44 million. Is this the best use of the money? I don't think so.
Isn't it mad?
Yeah. But, so yeah, it's worth looking at the other options. They've clearly, seen that this was an area that was capable of flooding as one of the danger areas. So they just kind of they've made it safe, but yeah, I don't know if it's the best option. But, so I looked at the advantages and disadvantages of this seawall. I came across a thing called the coastal squeeze. So basically, this is where natural habitats migrate when the sea level rises. They go more inland. By putting a seawall, it squashes them against the seawall, and they diminish in quality and quantity. So it's not good for our environment. Advantages of the seawall, obviously, it's impermeable barrier. It's good at its job, and it's quite easily constructed. But as we know, the appearance isn't that nice, and doesn't have a lot of. It doesn't have a social aspect. It doesn't have anything else. It is just a barrier. So as you've probably seen in the other projects, it's the retreat, attack, defend. So these are the options that Portsmouth could take. I know the seawall defends, but there are other options of defending. So this is retreating.
Dutch call it hard and soft.
There.
Yeah.
So by retreating, you're making Portsmouth smaller. Population may shrink, but you're saving money on costs for defending or expanding. Attacking. So you'll still flood the areas that are in danger, but you'll expand and you won't lose housing, and you may even increase tourism. It's quite interesting living on the water, but it is a high expense. And then this is defending in a slightly different way. I've come up with, it could maybe work, that you just block off these. That way you still have, you have the whole of Portsmouth, and you're not doing a seawall there, and you're not flooding there. You're cutting it off, and everywhere north is safe. So the whole of Portsmouth would remain, and you'd be able to use maybe the standing water for housing. So still maybe attack onto standing water or for agriculture, and then you could use these for maybe transport and social aspects. So I just went slightly into a bit of tidal power, just because I was looking at the seawall and it going across these two parts here. The Reims tidal power station in Brittany, France, generates 240 megawatts, and their span of 24 turbines is 332 meters. And as you can see, we've got greater than that, so we could potentially do something similar like that. Some other more examples, the Swansea Tidal Lagoon, which I know someone else has looked at, and I won't try and say the name of that, but it's the storm surge barrier in Holland, in Netherlands, and that was built in 1986, and that defends against the North Sea.
That was the last of their barriers.
Yeah. Do you know how that's pronounced?
The Scheldt.
Can you give it a go?
No, Scheldt.
Yeah.
I've drove across it.
Another case study?
So we looked at the case studies on defending and different approach on it. This was defending, and this is quite a recent project by by BRG. Was looking at Lower Manhattan and on their flooding defense, and they kind of what they've come up with is call it a U-shaped enclosure to encompass the Lower Manhattan, so they can defend against the flood. But instead of just having a massive wall, they've kind of created more of a playful environment for the city itself and the residents. And you can see it could have steps and then more of a playful area. And you got visitor centres, not visitor centres, but it's more of an educational area. So you can have it's actually got marked how high the sea level is going to rise up to. It kind of educates people on what the effect is going to be like. And this one I found it was quite interesting one, because during when it's flooding, you close it up, and it's a defense. But when you don't have flood, to open it up, make it into a market store, and that would be quite a good, vibrant environment for Netflix. And the second case study I looked at was a floating city concept by AT Design Offices. Well, it's again, it's all concept. It's not really being built, but they're looking into it, and they might. The Chinese, the biggest property developer in China is kind of looking into it, and they were saying if we do create something like this, then we need to start small scale. Essentially, what these are these hexagonal pods, which modules actually, which you can build it on the island, float it in, connect it, and you can connect all these infrastructures together and create a sort of a self-sustaining city in the middle of the ocean.
So like a meal drone.
Pretty much, yeah. So it just comes in, attaches, and you increase your infrastructure, and the city grows a bit. What they're planning is to have a sustainable, like I said, it's a self-sustaining community, so it's going to have food and everything, and they expect, well, they're actually planning to put growing like fields and everything in there as well, so you can farm and live in there. I think it's an interesting concept, but in terms of like feeding people, I don't know if it's going to be sustainable or not. So
What do you
we'll
think?
have to see.
Yes, no.
We'll have
Yes
to wait
or no?
for it to kind of. I mean, we'll look. I'll kind of expand more on it later on, but I mean, we've already heard from food agriculture. It's not really sustainable because it's the demand for food per person is like a person would require 0.5 hectares of land. That's including cattle and all that. That's not very big.
The New York scheme was put in place after Hurricane Katrina,
It was, yeah,
and there were
illegal.
5 schemes done. And
Yes.
if you look at the other 4, they're also very interesting, and they were all
Yeah.
precipitated by the.
One of them was OMA as well.
Yeah, there was the OMA one, and there were some very good other ones too. They're all very interesting strategies to look at as research precedences, but they were put in place by a great Dutch guy who's very, hopefully we might get him over here one day, who's a great proponent of people gearing up better towards flood defence.
So that was the same architect, sorry, the other projects? Or?
No, the other they had 5 overall. I think it was by or 6. Very research-based practices, doing a lot of exploration of the specific problem for New York, commissioned by the Mayor of New York under the guidance of this guy, who's been trying to get Americans to think collectively about their defences.
Were they all this idea of softening? And
No, they explore which is the best for which situation. But collectively, America has no political mechanism, or hasn't had, to deal with things like Hurricane Katrina or coastal rise, in the same way that we haven't got a Solent linked up yet with Sussex. And so that they don't have a collective means to deal with it on a unitary system, and that's what they've been trying to do. So this was part of the polemic.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's
We're finished.
yeah.
We're finished. You say the end.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
I think what was interesting about you as a group is there's a lot of really interesting, innovative things that we found, both actually historically. It was fascinating. There's things like you did seem to understand the canals, you understood the railways were much more extensive before. So that was actually good. But then endless things like this, with customers, which are great. Strong piece of work, so I love the group.
Yeah.
And very, for this stage of the project, you've done a huge amount.
We've got more.
You got more.
I know, we're going to see the individual.
Yeah.
2 proposals.
Yeah.
We're going to have to be fairly quick on that.
We've got
Yeah.
45 minutes.
I mean, the other thing is, can I congratulate you on working so well together, because it actually strung to well. But working with 9, that's an achievement. That's something you want to value, because when you go to practices and you work in studios, you always work in teams, and it's actually, there's a skill to doing that. So congratulations on that.
Some of the best stuff is where you're drawing yourselves. And actually, they would do a combination of things, photos and questions, stuff you draw yourselves, they were actually quite strong.
So we let that team go first.
Yeah.
What you haven't quite done is connected up. So for instance, that issue about the water, what is the cost of that in terms of energy? So I think there's a bit of, it needs to sit around the table and go through that again and just actually define this a little bit. I think that would be really, really good. But things like the, like the fact that we went right back to 1980, whoever was doing the rise of sea levels. And that was interesting because, that it's how it's exponentially going. But the thing with those floodings, you've got to think of the worst scenario is not just a metre or 2 metre sea rise, it's that combined with a storm and a particularly high spring tide. You know, there's spring tides every 2 weeks, but then there's a spring tide, which is that equinox. That's what's combined, and that huge, massive floodings in the 1950s on the East Coast before the Thames Barrier, but because they all combined. There was a storm in the North Sea, there was a very, very high tide. Those two all combined, and then there's a massive amount of flooding. That's the worst scenario. Yeah. And then you also have a lot of rain, so your surface water is overwhelming as well. So it's a perfect storm of all those things.
What's quite interesting is 50 years, if that happens and there's a storm surge, there's 3 roads off Portsmouth. The 2 roads, so apart from the M2275, won't be accessible, so there'll be 1 road off the island. So they can be very dangerous.
Absolutely.
Especially on the north area, that's going to be the worst thing.
Massive.
I mean, just one couple of points I would also like to say is you must, I think, want to be doing this amount of research. The important thing about the research is the conclusions of the research. And so you need to be self-reflective at the end of it. What does that mean and what does that give and what is the importance of it? Because otherwise you're just a repository for information. And it's not about repositorying of it, it's about knowing what you're looking at and having a focus on what you're looking at. So there were a couple of things that particularly stood out. I mean, I thought the tourism one was very interesting. The tourism one was very interesting. And I would sort of like to know more about, there's very little conflict speed here, or industry, unlike Bournemouth, Brighton, which is about the side of us, and we're like in a vacuum between. And you it might have been sort of leading towards an analysis of whether there's viability there, and also the distribution of hotels presently, nothing north of Windsor Churchill Avenue.
Yeah, 4 and 3 is on the other side.
Yeah, and then you've got this terrible new hotel going up near the station. So what is the quality of these hotels? And you didn't really play out that one, which is actually they're not attracting the market. They're only filling us with the market.
Yeah, but the view can get it from a twin.
Sure.
But it's still time.
But it would be quite interesting to also know how readily available other accommodations like Airbnb in Portsmouth. Can you get it? And are there many of them? I mean, how much extra market is there? Because it's not just hotels.
But what doesn't make sense? I mean, there were 20,000 students on the island. And all of that, a lot of that accommodation becomes available.
It's not much.
So it must be.
It must be. And is there a campsite? Where would someone go camping?
Campsite? Oh, there is, very small.
So there are sort of things to look at like that, which sort of makes a better picture, which I think is interesting. One other thing is, it would be lovely to know, just from one of you, to quick calculation, if they spent £44 million on that northern barrage dike, and about 50% of it is in front of the Hilsey lines, how much money have they wasted? Your money, our money.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it is staggering, isn't it? And it'd be quite interesting to have that calculation about which is the bit that is directly in front of the Hilsey lines, which of course are a much bigger barrage. I mean, that is a
well, it would be some more cost of a barrage across east. You could probably calculate that from looking at the Dutch example.
Yeah, and that is the stuff that becomes politically powerful. You write to the press and you say, look, we've just wasted £24 million in Portsmouth on building this redundant piece of thing in front of what we've already got. Why? Outrage.
Good. Okay. So we got the 4 or the 5? 4. 4.